This is Roberta Green in interview with Jean Reynolds, Monday, September 22nd, 2014 in Huntsville, Ontario. This is part 2 of the interview with Jean Reynolds, and we're just going to review part 1 with Jean's identification of her name, her birthplace, parents' name, and then we'll start our interview today. Hi, Jean.
Hi.
Could we just review your name and your birthplace, please?
My name is Jean Ellen Reynolds. I was born June 28th, 1928, my parents' wedding anniversary. My mother's name was Hazel Woodbury Battram. She was born in Hamilton, Ontario. My father was Sidney Robert Davis. He was born in Severn Bridge, Ontario. And
you were born in Huntsville.
And I was born in Huntsville at 17 Dufferin Street South. And I was born at home because there were no hospitals in Huntsville at that time. And it was right near the reservoir.
I think that's about where we were just leaving off last time as you finished high school and went off to business school. Could you just tell us a little bit more about that business school, where it was and who you stayed with?
I went to CBC, which was Canada Business College in Hamilton, Ontario, and took, of course, a business training with Pittman Shorthand. And I stayed with my grandfather, Battram, and my aunt. My grandmother had died when I was quite young. So this was within walking distance of their home. But I got rather homesick for Huntsville because there were no obvious pine trees or cedar trees or snow on the trees. And other than that, it was quite enjoyable.
Family's been important to you all along. I think you've had various grandparents come and stay with you in Huntsville, haven't you?
That's correct. My father was the oldest in a family of 8. So when my grandmother Davis was widowed, she didn't like to stay on the farm alone in the winter, so she would take turns and spend a month or 2 with each of the 4 daughters and 4 sons. So we always enjoyed having her with us. Also, my grandfather Battram and my Aunt Jean would come up most summers, and that was when we always got our first watermelon. This was his treat for us.
Oh, that's a good memory.
And Grandpa always helped with the gardening because my father had a huge garden.
We're going to talk a lot about your father in another part, in part 3.
Mm-hmm.
I know he was very important to you.
Absolutely.
And when you refer to him, I think you refer to him by a different name than just as your dad. What did people call him?
Well, the family and his close friends all called him S.R., which was short for Sidney Robert, of course.
Okay.
And he quite enjoyed that.
When you came back from business school then, you were at home with him, living in the house with him. What was his occupation at that time? He had quite a few jobs.
I think he was working at the liquor store.
But he was involved with the post office at some point too,
but he
wasn't
was at the liquor store for a fairly short time. Being a veteran, he had first call on any government offices. So
Good.
After his time at the liquor store, excuse me, he moved on to the post office, which was then in the town hall. And of course, that's where we got our mail our box number was 703, and it was down near the bottom. The whole wall was boxes.
Yes.
And he was actually postmaster during the transition of the post office from that location up to the new location.
That's quite a change, isn't it?
It is.
Yes, getting them
Very much so.
out of the town hall and into a separate building.
Mm-hmm.
I think the new site of the post office, the present one, that location has been used for many buildings in the past. I think it's
Yes,
been many different things.
yes.
Now, when you came back to Huntsville, can you tell me a little bit about what jobs you had when you got back here?
Well, I started working for George Hutchison Insurance right away because Mr. Hutchison had spoken to my father to see if I would be interested in a position, a secretarial position in his office. So that was very attractive to me. And off and on, weekends probably, or I guess when I was growing up, maybe before that, I worked at Stedman's 5 cents to $1.
Oh, yes. Yep.
Worked at Ecclestone's for hardware for a very short time. And Bowley's Bakery on the bakery side, not the tea room.
Those were on the main street?
They were.
Yes.
All of them were on Main Street.
You also mentioned a phrase, roving secretary. Can
Oh,
you tell me a
yes.
bit about that?
Well, just out of interest, I would do secretarial shorthand or, any stenographic work just for, say, one sitting. And I worked for John Haig, who was a surveyor, and Muskoka Wood for a very short time, until one of the Hutchisons asked me to take shorthand in French. And there was one other place I worked. Anyway, those two stand out in my mind.
When you were in your office at George Hutchison's Insurance, I think you met somebody in that office that became important to you.
I did. Bernard Reynolds was office manager. Mr. Hutchison himself was there most times, in his own office. But Bernard and I shared the actual working area, and I was the only secretary. So eventually we would go out for coffee. And one thing led to another, and I ended up marrying my boss.
I think that's kind of, I like that story.
In October of 1950.
Oh,
October 14th.
a fall wedding. That's a nice time to get married.
And each of my bridesmaids wore a fall color in velvet.
Wow. That must have been beautiful.
It was in the pictures. It's great.
Do you still have some of those pictures?
Yes.
Oh, wonderful.
Helen Ralston was in dark green. My sister Mary Lou was in gold. And Helen Murr was in a sort of a chartreuse color.
Oh, so rich.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah, very interesting.
And where did you get married?
Trinity United Church.
Oh, good.
And Reverend Frank Milligan
Oh.
was our minister. And of course, he was also instrumental in bringing the hospital here with my father and Harmon Bryce, who had the Forester.
Are we talking about Fairburn Hospital?
Yes, that
Yes,
hospital.
okay. That was a very, very important decision for Huntsville,
Yes.
wasn't it?
And Reverend Milligan had a son, James, that I went to school with, who became a very well-known operatic singer.
Oh.
I have one of his records.
Oh. And he's a Huntsville boy.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. When you were dating Jean, just before, let's go back a tiny bit, you mentioned, I think you did some dancing around
yes,
this
yes.
area. Where did you go to do that?
Well, one of the things we would do was go on the Algonquin, you know,
Oh,
the boat,
yes.
up to Biguin Island and have a dance at Biguin Inn and maybe have not exactly a dinner, but something to eat and coffee, and then come back.
Very special.
Another place we would go is, and I can't remember whether it was called the Archway Club or the Rock, but it was down the highway on the left
Oh, yes.
a bit.
Yes.
And there was a very, very nice orchestra there.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. But then we'd also go square dancing. Nearly every township around Huntsville had a local hall, and they'd have square dances on the weekends.
Where did you learn to square dance? How did you learn that skill?
I think it was out at Chaffee Hall,
Oh, okay.
right, you know, practically in the center of town. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And a lot of the dances, too, hospital dances to raise money for the hospital,
Yes.
were in the town hall auditorium upstairs.
Oh, yes. That was a lovely room, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
That was a multi-purpose room,
Yes.
yeah.
Now, you also mentioned bowling. Was bowling something that you and Bernard did before you were married or after, or both?
I think it was after we were married,
And,
and that was on Main Street.
yep, yep.
Mm-hmm.
Did couples go and...
Yes.
So would you have other friends with you that you would be bowling with then? Or,
Yes.
Yeah.
I can't just remember who they were at this point.
You also mentioned something through the church, a fortnightly club.
Oh yes, that was a group for newlyweds, and it was fun. We
Oh,
did a lot of things together. And I was also in the Delight Hilliard missionary group, and Delight Hilliard was George Hutchison's second wife. She had been a missionary.
oh,
And when I was younger, I was in the CGIT, Canadian Girls in Training.
we used to hear a lot more about that group than we do now.
Mm-hmm. I don't even know whether it still exists.
No. You enjoyed those?
Oh,
Sessions?
yes, very much so. And also, later on, of course, after we were married, they had what they call Shandyman's Supper at the church.
What was that?
In the basement then, because there was not the auditorium at the back that there is now.
Okay.
And this was actually a dinner that the men would prepare, moose or venison,
Oh,
and the women would do baked beans
oh my
and
goodness.
pie.
Oh,
And yeah, that was fun too.
Was that a fundraiser for the church or just fellowship, do you think?
I think it was a fundraiser, actually.
It must have been fun with the men doing some
Oh,
of
it
the cooking.
was, absolutely.
Jean, did you say your wedding reception was held at home?
Yes, it was.
Yes.
Yeah, at
Which house was that then?
17, no, I'm sorry. No, it was at the house on the corner of Center and Lansdowne, or
Okay.
Veterans Way now.
Oh, yes.
That's
yes.
where it was.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
And that was your dad's house at that time?
That's correct.
Right.
And Mother Irene was there then, and in fact, she made our cake. She was a great cook, and yes, she just had a beautiful reception.
That must be quite a big event.
It was, yes.
That's probably one of your choice memories, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yep. Can you fill me in on where you and Bernard lived? Where your house was when you got married? Where did you start? Where did you go to next?
Well, we lived, and I can't remember the name of the street. I think it was Maple Street. We called it North Huntsville,
Okay, good enough.
just off West Road.
Yes, like climbing up from the pink
It was,
house.
yes, it was up off the main road. It was complete bush up there.
Oh.
It was just a bungalow, actually, but it was very comfortable. Burned wood, had a wood furnace in the basement,
Uh-huh.
and yeah, we had quite an enjoyable time there. And when we moved from there, we moved to Florence Street, corner of Florence and West Street.
Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Not that far from where your dad's house was then.
Well, it
He
was,
was Veterans Way and
pardon?
he was Veterans Way and Center?
Center.
Yes. Oh, okay.
Uh-huh. And this was the old Skinner farm. There was a lot of open space all around it. But of
Oh,
course that changed rapidly.
yes.
And, you know, and the Hubbles lived kitty corner across from us, Frank Hubble and Betty. And they were friends of Mother Irene's. And I guess that's about all there.
Did you move from that house to this house? This present
Um,
house? Your 21 King Street?
Yes, we did.
Yes.
Yeah.
Was this house built for you?
No, this was built in the early 1900s or late 1800s by the Golden Lumber Company.
Oh, yes. Okay.
And I guess that's why there's so much wood paneling and wood beams and everything in here.
Oh, it's such a lovely, rich building.
And of
isn't
course,
it?
this caught our eyes right away because both our fathers had been involved in lumbering. And when the Golden Lumber Company got into financial difficulties, the Muskoka Wood took over. And this house was part of the settlement.
Oh.
And the property actually ran all the way down to, was it North Street? No, North Street's up there. I can't think what the name it was, but it's not there now.
Down probably close to where Dara Howell Way is now
Right.
that we have
That's
made.
correct. There was a street down there.
Oh, that's huge.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. But we could hardly afford to buy the house, let alone all that extra property, those 4 extra lots.
Yes.
So we took a mortgage with Mr. Frank Hutchison. It's called Vernon Lake Realty.
Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm. And let the other 4 go.
Right.
And that's when Huntsville Planing Mills acquired it.
Aha. They were there for a long time?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So they were sort of your neighbors then?
Oh, absolutely. And of course, Bill, my brother, eventually acquired the mill.
I didn't know that.
Yes.
No. Oh. And for how long was he involved with it?
Oh, up until it closed.
And what's his name?
William Wardell Nichols.
Oh, okay. Oh, yes.
No, actually, he and Mary Lou are step brother and sister, but we don't use that term.
Yeah.
Because we're all a big family.
Yes. Well, that's wonderful that he was close by
Yes.
like that.
Well, you see, his uncle Arnott Adamson had owned it previously.
Yes. I read that somewhere too.
Mhm.
Yes. So this area has changed considerably,
Oh,
hasn't
absolutely.
it? Was the Hart House across from you when
Yes.
you bought this?
It's
probably?
always, yes, it's always been there. In fact, Marjorie Hart asked permission to walk through our property when she walked to the post office.
Oh my goodness.
Uh-huh.
You front on 2 roads, don't you?
Yes. The driveway goes through from King Street to West
Yes.
and vice versa.
Oh, but you find other people that take a shortcut but don't ask permission though sometimes.
Absolutely. Purelator tried for a while. They don't do that anymore.
No. Your house here is magnificent with such high ceilings and all the wood all through it. You have also filled it with many treasures, haven't you? You
Yes,
have
there are
a lot of history here.
A lot of lumbering memorabilia and family heirlooms, because I'm the last in both families.
Yes.
And yeah, lots of keepsakes.
Can we just talk about Bernard for a few minutes?
Mhm.
We started off with him in your office,
Yes.
manager there. There was a lot to him, though, in the way of being a community-minded citizen, wasn't there?
Yes. He was the first in his family to go to university. And of course, he worked long hours doing other jobs as well as working at the insurance office. He kept books for people because he had a university degree at the University of Toronto.
Excellent.
And he became secretary treasurer of the Huntsville Board of Education. And he was also on the hospital board. He was, I'm not sure whether he was secretary or treasurer, but there are 2 pictures of him over in the boardroom at the hospital, the new hospital. So that leads me to believe he was both on the hospital board and the foundation.
Oh, yes.
I think he was chairman of the foundation for a while.
Aren't we lucky he would give so much to the community?
That was his pleasure.
He
and
was
joy.
interested in the trees and the wood aspect too, wasn't he? In
Oh,
Algonquin Park,
absolutely.
I think.
He joined the Algonquin, the Friends of Algonquin. He became chairman of that, I think it was, and also he was chairman of the Algonquin Forestry Authority, and he was treasurer of the foundation.
Oh my goodness. So busy.
Excuse me. Yes. Plus, when he was on the hospital board, of course, there were meetings in different locations out of town. So he would have his fare paid, but he'd pay mine so that I could go along.
Could you tell me a little bit about Bernard's private interests, some of his personal things he liked to do?
Well, of course, we both got interested in genealogy because my father got us started. And he loved to trace back his ancestry to Ireland.
Do you have records of that?
Yes, we have records. We were in touch with researchers over there. And of course, my family came from there as well. Southern Ireland, no, sorry, Northern Ireland. And so we worked on that quite a bit.
And research at that time wasn't as easy, was it? Now
No,
that we have
not
the
at all.
internet and ancestry, it's easier, but not
And
then.
we both belonged to the Ontario Genealogical Society for years,
Excellent.
and they were a big help.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, well, he loved to ski. We used to go cross-country skiing in Arrowhead Park.
Oh, nice.
And, of course, golf was the big thing.
And where did you golf?
Oh, I didn't golf much because I had fallen and hurt my side.
Oh.
But he had a group of men that he liked to golf with.
And that was in Huntsville?
Huntsville Downs. And then, of course, when we were in Florida, at our house in Florida, he liked to go, and I would drive the cart for him. And it was fun to get out and see the countryside, you know.
Oh, yes.
And bowling. We bowled when it was on Main Street. And he also belonged to a small investment group.
So busy, so much he was involved with. Singing too, I believe.
Oh yes, we were both in the choir at church, and he would have the odd solo, and I'd sit there and be nervous for him,
Oh.
but he did pretty well.
Oh.
And
There were some plays on in Huntsville too that
oh
he got
yes, the
involved with, I
Rotary
think.
Club did quite a number of shows.
Good, beautiful shows.
Yes.
Yes.
Hugh Mackenzie was instrumental in
Oh.
arranging a lot of those. And Bernard was in 2 or 3 of them. And fishing, loved fishing.
So would he go away to do that, like overnight, or would he just
Well-
do day trips?
He actually belonged to a hunt camp, the last house hunt camp up near Ox Tongue River. And that had a lot of friends of his, the Blackburn family,
Yes.
and different ones like that. And they would quite often do fishing trips.
Nice.
So, you know, he enjoyed that.
Was he a hunter also?
Well, he never ever shot anything. They used to tease the life out of him because he managed to kill both a moose and a deer at different times, of course, with the car.
Oh.
And when he hit the moose, we were actually driving to Kenora with our friend, and the moose came up out of the swamp
Yes.
and headed towards the car, and we were hauling a house trailer, and the moose hit its head against the corner of the trailer and broke its neck.
Oh my goodness.
So we couldn't move the trailer because you have to call the police when an animal is killed. So we had to walk to a house and call the police. And would you believe, by the time the police got there, now the car was sort of out in the wild on the road.
Yes.
The animal's carcass had disappeared. Somebody had seen it as a prospective dinner.
Oh my goodness. But it wasn't you.
No, it wasn't us,
Oh my gosh.
but
Yeah.
we had killed it.
That would have been some fine eating.
Yes,
Oh my goodness.
so that was quite exciting. And the
Yes.
deer was another time when he was coming back from the camp, but it wasn't quite so exciting.
You could do without that kind of exciting.
Yes.
Yes. Well, now, Jean, do you mind if we talk about some of your activities? Now, some of them overlapped with Bernard's because you both like to sing in the choir.
Yes.
And you were both skiers.
Mm-hmm.
But you had some of your own thing. You told me that you did pen pal activities for a while too.
Pen pal?
Yes.
Yes, I corresponded, in different places in the world, and it was very interesting. I did quilting for a while, and of course I knit all the time, and I took a sewing course down when Singer's had a store in town
Yes.
on Main Street,
That's right, they did. I remember they gave lessons in there too.
but I didn't make anything outstanding, just run of the mill. And we we were both in the choir. I think I mentioned that.
Yep. You were really interested in the start of Pioneer Village too.
Yes, yes.
Can you tell us a little bit
Well,
about that time, how that got going?
Of course, we were all, the group involved, were all interested in antiques and early Huntsville history, and so
Good.
we would go over to what we called the band hall,
Yep.
and where Bill Litchfield had some of his antique collection, and it sort of grew from there. There was Marjorie Demain, Maureen Hunt, Bill Litchfield, and myself.
Thank heavens for this core group that cared so much.
Yes, we had a wonderful time. And I worked too, after the Pioneer Village opened, I worked as an interpreter in the Shea House.
Oh.
And
And that would be Alan Shea's house that was moved over there?
I believe so.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Did your committee decide which buildings were going to go into the village? How were those decisions made?
That I'm not positive about. I know there was one gentleman that had a team there that was always available around the village.
Yes.
And my daughter, Sydney, she worked in one of the houses too, but I can't remember which one. Anyway.
Lots of changes over there
Oh, very much so.
as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I have a picture of me with the Portage Flyer when it was still out at the Portage.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Mhm.
That's a treasure.
Yes.
That's an important piece of our history.
Mm-hmm. And just recently when I was looking through things in the attic, I came across a beautiful old framed picture of Mr. Bernath,
Oh,
who was a longtime principal of Huntsville High School.
yes.
So I'm thinking of taking that either to the Historical Society or the Heritage Place, as they now call it.
Yes.
Mhm.
You've got another huge piece of memory that I want you to go over with us, and that is the beginnings of the bookcase in Huntsville.
Oh, for goodness sake. Well, I had always been fascinated with books and constantly reading all the time and collecting certain authors. And a friend of mine, Lenore Wary, had an art gallery down near the bridge in a building that George Wilgris had built, as he had built my home, my first home where I was born. Anyway, Lenore decided she would like to have some help in the store. So she asked me if I would like to take my book collection into one room at the Athena Gallery, as she called it. And her section was all local art and crafts. And they were on consignment.
Oh, yes.
So anyway, I thought about this because my daughter was very young. She was only about 3. But we did know a very trustworthy lady who would come in and care for her and look after the house and everything. So I decided to give it a try, the book business. So I opened in one of the back rooms at the gallery in 1971, but it was used books. And I was only there a very short time when I began to realize that people wanted new books. I was having requests for new books. So I had to change my game plan and switch into new books. And there was a news agency that supplied books at that time.
Oh.
So I hired them to, keep the stock moving. And it turned out to be quite successful. And we had, where you search for out-of-print books.
Oh, yes.
There was a store in Toronto that I could use.
Oh.
And they were a big help.
Oh.
And my husband named the store the bookcase.
Excellent.
And anyway, we were there about a year when a second bookstore opened just about half a block away.
I don't remember that.
Yes, they weren't here very long. They had a store in Bracebridge, but he found it was too difficult, to run 2 stores in 2 different locations.
Yes.
So they weren't in business terribly long. But anyway, after I'd been there with Lenore for a few years, Lenore and her husband Bruce, who holidayed on the island of Montserrat, decided they wanted to buy a house down there.
Oh.
So I had to decide, did I want to buy the whole building and business?
Oh.
But we decided to do that.
That's a big step.
It is. And we ran both businesses for a couple of years, I guess. But it turned out to be just too complicated because with everything on consignment, you had to keep very close track of the whole thing.
Yes.
And people weren't moved to change the stock readily, and things would be there for quite some time. So eventually we closed the craft section,
Yes.
art section,
Yeah.
and made it strictly books and maps,
Oh, maps.
traveling maps.
Oh, wonderful.
And that
Oh.
went very well.
It was wildly successful.
It really
Absolutely.
was.
I mean, this is a huge memory for all of Huntsville. You know,
You know,
the
and we
success
quite
of the
enjoyed it.
bookcase.
The one thing lacking was parking.
oh yes,
There's no parking there.
true.
Although the Anglican church up behind us permitted us to park our cars up there, but we couldn't, you know, have public parking.
Yes.
And by this time, we had moved my Aunt Jean up from Hamilton because my grandfather had died.
Oh yes.
So she moved into the upstairs apartment and lived there till she died.
Where? At the bookcase?
There's an
Oh.
apartment upstairs.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
How nice. Then she was close to you too then.
Yes. And she would serve the girls tea that worked downstairs.
Oh.
So she was part of the operation.
Well, that's good.
And of course, Huntsville was small enough that she could walk to do her shopping and take a cart.
Yes.
Yeah,
Was the A&P store uptown at that
it
time?
was. It was. Right in the middle of town there
Yes.
where the Salvation Army used store was.
That's right. Yes.
And across from that was Huntsville Trading Company that was owned by the Ginsburgs.
Oh.
And Israel Ginsburg had been mayor of Huntsville at one time.
Oh, yes.
Uh-huh.
Is that the store that we think of as Flotrons?
That's correct.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. It's been a tradition in Huntsville, hasn't it?
Yes.
For many years.
Very much so.
Do you remember any of your employees that you had in the bookstore helping you?
Yes,
the way?
Betty Laver was there for quite some time. Wonderful help. And Judy Ruan. In fact, her husband Jack worked for us for a while.
Oh.
But Judy had been a librarian wherever she had lived previously, and she was a wonderful help.
Major events in your life? Do you want to mention anything? Or shall we just go on to some of your early memories of Huntsville different from the way it is today?
Well, of course, the death of my mother when I was quite young, that was quite a blow to get used to a housekeeper. Excuse me. She was wonderful, you know, but not the same exactly. And then when Mother Irene came, she arrived, of course, and it was more like being home.
Yes.
And she had 2 young children,
Oh.
Bill, William Wardell Nichols,
Yes.
and Mary Louise Nichols.
Okay.
So I was there for a year. My father married Mother Irene in 1949, and Bernard and I were married in 1950. So I was only there actually a year.
Yes. Yes.
But no, she made my father's life interesting and, you know, happy. And
Yes.
she was a great entertainer, and she loved to play bridge. And that's sort of where I picked it up, too.
Did you learn it from her then?
I didn't
you
learn
say?
it from her, but I learned to respect it, and I learned the rules.
Yes.
Yes.
Because you're still a member of
Oh,
the
yes.
bridge club, aren't you?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
At, well, we play in the hospital marathon bridge to raise money for the hospital.
Wonderful.
And you go around from different houses. You have a schedule, tells you when to play and who you play.
Oh.
And the rules to abide by.
Oh,
Mm-hmm.
okay. I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah. Keeps you busy.
Yes. Well, let's just talk for a minute about what we think of as early Huntsville when you were growing up compared to, say, later on, when you were running the bookcase. You mentioned things about the streets and the sidewalks
Oh,
on
yes.
the main street.
Yes. Well, I can, excuse me, I can remember in certain areas there were wooden paneled sidewalks, and the plowing was done with teams of horses,
Oh, what a sight.
and it wasn't unusual to see an open truck, sort of V-shaped, hauled by horses. I shouldn't say truck, but it was a wagon, hauled by horses, full of kiln
Oh.
K-I-L-N, dry,
Yes.
from the mill,
Yes.
because people used that to burn.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think I mentioned before there was a huge fountain out in front of the town hall with a great big trough at the front for the horses to drink from.
Wonderful.
And the Salvation Army used to play music on the corner, usually on a Saturday night.
Oh, beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Bridges, too.
Oh, yes, there was only the one swing bridge down in the center of town.
Yes.
Now, there was a railroad bridge, but it was further out near Hunter's Bay.
Yes. Yes.
And
No Center Street Bridge.
no Center Street Bridge whatsoever.
No. That's
And
quite
Bernard's
interesting.
name is on that, too.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I think he was on the council when that was built.
It was quite a change for Huntsville.
Yes.
Yes.
And there were a number of mills down around Hunter's Bay. That's where the Bethune Pulp and Lumber Company main mill was.
Okay.
And there were 2 or 3 along the river between Hunter's Bay and what we called the fairgrounds.
Oh, yes. Yes. Around towards the high school?
Yes.
Where the high school
Where
is
the
now?
high school is now.
Yes. Okay.
Yes. And, yeah.
Now, merchants, there were a lot of merchants making their own goods in town
Oh, yes,
in
yes.
early years. I think you mentioned someone named Christensen to
Oh,
me.
yes, Charlie Christensen. He actually made or repaired shoes, I believe, but also one of his main products was lacrosse sticks and snowshoes.
Like that beautiful snowshoe you showed me.
Yes, I have 2 pair of the snowshoes, and I believe the leather came from the Anglo-Canadian Leather Company.
But I think it probably
Right
would
in
have.
town.
Yes,
Mhm.
that would make sense, wouldn't it?
Yes,
They are so finely crafted.
absolutely.
So beautiful. So when you were doing sports in town, some of your equipment was produced right here.
Oh, absolutely. I have a lacrosse stick that was my brother's. He died, my brother Bob Davis. He died a couple of years ago, but he played lacrosse with Jack Biondi.
Oh,
They went to school together.
that team did very well, didn't it?
Yes, very well.
Mm-hmm.
And Jack did even better. He became famous.
Yes, yes.
Mhm.
I think there are files on him at the library.
Really?
Yes. Mhm.
Wow.
You've seen many different kinds of cars through
Oh,
town
yes.
too, haven't you, over
Yes,
the years?
I can remember when they used to have to crank it at the front.
Oh, yes. And gas stations. I think there were many more gas
Oh,
stations
yes.
right along the main street, weren't there?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
One of my bridesmaids, Helen Ralston, her father had the Union Garage right at the corner of the far end of the swing bridge.
Oh, yes.
You know, there's a parking lot there now,
Yes.
but that was Union Garage, and on the other side was Castleman's Garage.
Oh, yes.
And, yeah, all kinds of them.
Right in town.
Mm-hmm. In the West End, too.
Yes, yes. I remember that too.
Because Bernard's father, after he left the mill, the Bethune mill, he worked various jobs, and one of them was working at the West End Motors.
Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Jean, we were also talking about some of the services, the number of doctors.
Oh, yes.
Getting needles, dentists.
Oh, yes. There were 3 doctors, Dr. McDonald, Dr. Evans, and Dr. Davies. There were 2 dentists, Dr. Fisher and Dr. Rogers.
Oh.
And when I was in public school, every year the whole school would march down Main Street to Dr. Evans' office, get our inoculation. We'd walk in one door and walk out the other door and march back to school.
Oh, my goodness. We sure don't do it that way now.
No.
No. The hospital situation we mentioned a bit, but you also told me about birthing houses. I hadn't been aware that Huntsville had birthing
Yes,
houses.
there were 2. One was Mrs. Yerington. I think her name was Hilda Yerington, and I'm not sure what the other one was, but I think her name was Clark.
What was the purpose of those birthing
Well,
houses?
the woman could go there to have her baby rather than have it at home.
Because there was no hospital at that time, was
no
there?
hospital, no.
So would they stay there for a few days after
Yes,
the birth?
yes,
Yes.
and they'd be taken care of. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned also someone who was running an ambulance service.
Oh,
of
Fred
sorts, too.
Loft.
Mhm.
Yes, he did that for quite some number of years. If anybody had a medical appointment, he would drive them.
And police, you mentioned about Burley
Oh,
Police.
yes, we only had one town policeman, no OPP within the town. And I believe his name was Watson. And he had his own uniform. And I don't know what they call that stick that he would carry.
Oh, no gun, a stick instead.
Yes, I don't recall a gun, but he'd sort of walk up and down one side of Main Street and down the other. But all of the townspeople were aware, you know, that he was in charge while he was on duty.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
One other thing you mentioned was whistles that you used to hear in town
yes.
in the early days.
Well, the mills down on Hunter's Bay, they would blow their whistles on the hour of certain times. Because I can remember my mother looking out the window and listening for the whistle to decide when it was 12 o'clock noon.
Yes.
Or 6 o'clock in the evening.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
We just don't have that at all anymore.
No,
No. Things have changed a lot,
absolutely, yes.
but it's still a wonderful place to live.
Oh, absolutely. I thought about moving, but Bernard and I decided we liked it too much here.
Oh.
So we stayed. Well, both our families were here, of course.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
I'm very thankful for all the excellent memories you have of Huntsville and sharing them with us too.
Well, I enjoyed talking about them. I'm sorry my memory isn't perfect anymore.
Oh, it's far better than mine. I love all the details that you have come up with, and thank you for that. Thanks for
Thank
sharing
you.
them. Do you want to say a final word about your feelings about this area here?
Well, my thoughts about Muskoka, and more particularly Huntsville, are in 3 words: water, rock, and trees, or God's country, as my father S.R. referred to it.
That's lovely. Let's leave it there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jean.